Hello, everyone. My name is Steve Kenzie. I'm the Executive Director of the UN Global Compact Network UK. I'd like to welcome you to the third installment in our series on Black Lives Matter and business, and today we will be looking at recruitment. We are absolutely delighted to be joined by Cynthia V Davis, the CEO of BAME Recruitment, who's going to share with us some of the unique aspects of recruiting Black people, and those of you that are interested in improving the diversity in your workforce, well, that's where it all begins, isn't it? So very much looking forward to that. We are using the Zoom webinar platform, which means you will be muted throughout, but we strongly encourage you to use either the Q&A function, that would be first choice, if you have questions, and do please type them in all the way through, or you can also use the chat function if you want to post any questions. I want to say a special thank you to NatWest Group, whose support for the whole webinar series has made it possible, and without which support this would be much more difficult. So we really appreciate their commitment both to this very important issue and to the UN Global Compact. If you are having any technical issues, do let us know through the chat and we'll do our best to help you out with that. And I think we can say from here, next slide, please, and we'll get started. To begin, I would be remiss. We know that many of you are already participating in the UN Global Compact, but for those of you that are not, we want to give you a little bit of information and encourage you to get involved. So the UN Global Compact Network UK is part of the world's largest responsible business initiative, the UN Global Compact, and we are connecting companies and other organizations in a global movement dedicated to driving sustainable growth. The essence of the UN Global Compact are 10 universal principles drawn from UN treaties in the areas of human rights, labor, environment, and anti-corruption. And that gives us a rock-solid foundation from which to advocate for responsible business all around the world. And we do. There are 68 local networks around the world seeking to improve corporate performance in the areas of sustainability. To join our initiative, and there are already more than 12,000 companies and another 3,500 non-business organizations participating, your CEO needs to send a letter to the UN Secretary General committing to operationalize the 10 principles throughout your organization, reporting annually on the progress you're making, and to support the wider UN development agenda, which at the moment is probably best expressed through the Sustainable Development Goals. Next slide, please. But maybe I'll add, we here in the UK offer lots of programming across this very wide agenda to support companies in their efforts to be more sustainable. We do more than 50 events a year, and we're really excited about this one, and it fits really well into our wider agenda. And on the screen you can see the Global Compact's 10 principles on the left and the Sustainable Development Goals on the right, and the lines in between are just to flag up how the Black Lives Matter movement links into both our Global Compact principles as well as the Sustainable Development Goals. This is an issue, the issues around respect for human rights, around eliminating discrimination and inequality, are absolutely central to our mission at the UN Global Compact and to the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals. So we're really delighted to have so many people participating in the webinar series that seem to have taken that message on board. Now I'm going to hand over to my colleague Cynthia, who has been integral to making this this webinar series happen, to give you a little bit more about the series and then what's motivated us to launch it. Cynthia, over to you.
Thanks, Steve. Hi, everyone. As Steve has just mentioned, my name is Cynthia, and I work alongside Steve and my colleague Carla. Along with my colleague Carla, we developed this Black Lives Matter in Business webinar series. I think off the back of George Floyd dying and the Black Lives Matter movement picking up, it was just, I personally was heavily impacted by it in the sense that I realized that my life was not what I thought it was. And I not only thought that UN Global Compact Network UK should be pioneering in this space in general because of who we are and what we stand for, but also because we're an organization and every organization needs to move away from lip service to actual action. And so me and Carla wanted to develop a webinar series in which each episode or each event had actual tangible takeaways for the businesses and participants who are going to be joining. And so as you can see here, we kicked off the series on the 15th of September with storytelling, where we harnessed the power of storytelling. And then we had another event called Where to Start on the 30th of September, in which we looked at the importance of anti-racist trainings, the importance of language and the correct language to use when it comes to Black people, and also the importance of ethnicity pay gap reporting. And then this webinar today is all about recruitment, which for me is really dear to my heart, because I think the first thing that occurred to me that really shook me a little bit was in essence how many building blocks or barriers that I have stacked against me personally when it comes to recruitment. And I actually have a friend who joined our last webinar, the Where to Start webinar, in which we had Deloitte speak on their ethnicity pay gap reporting and all the work that they're doing around diversity and inclusion for Black people within their organization. And she was just so inspired and taken aback by how much Deloitte were doing that she actually said to me that Deloitte is a place that she wants to seek opportunities to try and work within that organization. And that's really key, especially for me and many people that I know, is that when looking for places to work or people to partner with on any level, I look to see how many Black people are in leadership. I look to see what they're doing around diversity and inclusion, because that is key for me. It's the same when it comes to millennials who are who look for organizations to work with that have sustainability and climate change embedded within this business strategy. It's exactly the same when it comes to wanting to work in an organization where I'm completely accepted. So just to speak on the agenda for today, so we've had Steve welcome all of us and speak a little bit about the UN Global Compact Network UK. I'm going to be doing a mini interactive segment for you guys, and then I'll be proud to introduce Cynthia, who is going to be speaking to us more about how to recruit more Black people. We're just going to have a wrap up and a Q&A session that will be led by Steve Kenzie. So I developed this is a little bit silly, but I developed a Black Lives Matter and Business pop quiz. Don't be afraid, it's literally 4 questions, and I'm going to launch the poll now. So the first question: white British employees are 46% likely to register with a recruitment agency when looking for a job. What do you think the likelihood is for an employee from a Black background? Is it 23%, 75%, or 88%? Question number 2. How many more job applications do British citizens from ethnic minority backgrounds have to send to get a positive response from employers compared to their white counterparts? Is it 60%, 25%, or 50%? Question number 3. How many Black employees with an A-level and graduate level qualification do you think are overqualified for their current jobs? Is it 40%, 68%, or 33%? Everyone's answering very different responses. And question number 4, how much higher are job refusal rates for Black African groups compared to white people? Is it 5%, 15%, or 20%? Okay. Ooh, almost everyone has answered. I'm going to give it a couple more seconds and then I'll just reveal the answers. We thought that it would be good to just kind of interact with you guys. When it comes to webinars, it's really just you guys are listening in, but it'll be good to interact on a level in which you interact on what we're actually discussing today to get a better understanding of what the current situation is. Okay, so if you haven't responded, I'm giving you 15 more seconds. Okay. 5 seconds. And I'm ending the poll. Share results. Okay, so for the first one, I have the answers on my phone. A large majority of you guys said 23%, which is a good, you know, it's a good, but not the right answer. The right answer is actually 75%. A whopping 75% of people from ethnic backgrounds or Black backgrounds are more likely to register with a recruitment agency when they come to looking for a job. Of course, that's not every Black person within the UK, but it's a pretty high number that it should not go unnoticed. For the second question, the majority of you said 60%, and that is absolutely correct. And this percentage was actually taken from a BBC article where a girl aged 22 named Rawan actually changed her name to Rowan when it came to applying for order jobs, and she noticed a huge turnaround in, you know, getting callbacks for interviews after she changed her name from Rawan Mohammed to Rowan Mohammed, because she assumed that people either thought that she was Irish or someone who wasn't, you know, an Ethiopian Black woman. Question number 3. The majority of you answered 68%, and the answer is actually 40%, which is not as high as 68%, but 40% is unacceptable, in which, I mean, of course, there are many different aspects that we need to take into consideration when it comes to the issues that not only Black people face, but people face in general, especially in the current climate where jobs are really hard to come by. However, if there's anything that organizations can do to kind of come against that, if there's budget for it and you are hiring, this is a number to definitely take into consideration. And the last question, the majority of you said 20%, and again, that is correct. And that is a percentage that impacts me a lot, actually, and that you know, it impacts me a lot, and it's something that I hope that this webinar specifically can really speak to, helping organizations, anyone who's actually listening on this webinar, to actually, again, move away from lip service to actual action. Okay, I hope you enjoyed that as much as I did. Just gonna stop sharing the results. So I would like to take a moment to just introduce Cynthia V Davis, who is the CEO and founder of Bain Recruitment, as well as the co-founder of Diversify. Cynthia is the multi-award-winning CEO Diversify, campaigner and champion. She is passionate about fair and equal opportunities for everyone, with over 20 years of recruitment experience. She has worked internally and on high-profile campaigns for the likes of BT, Carphone Warehouse, ITV, House of Commons, and Comic Relief. She's a working parent, mentor, keynote speaker, and diversity panelist. And she's also the chair of the board for diversity focused publishing charity. Sorry. And it is actually an honor to have her come and speak to us today. So thank you so much, Cynthia, and please take it away.
Thanks, Cynthia. Too many Cynthias on the webinar today, so it might get a little confusing. But yeah, thank you so much for that kind introduction, and I too am delighted to be here today. And I have to say that pop quiz that you did was amazing, because it just shows the stark reality of where we are, and I suppose some of the work that's still needed, you know, to change the narrative, especially for Black talent. But just to add on from what Cynthia said, you know, I am chief executive of an organisation that's called BAME Recruitment, which is a diversity and inclusion consultancy firm, and I set this business up just over 5 years ago now, just out of sheer frustration of not seeing change happen fast enough, and for not seeing everyone having equal access to opportunities, especially Black talent. This is something that I've personally experienced myself throughout my 20-year kind of career working in recruitment, and it's a frustration that I hear when people say there's no Black talent. You know, it absolutely drives me crazy. So, you know, the business I set up was to try and bust that myth, to really showcase the fantastic Black talent that's out there, but to really just make sure that organizations are taking the right kind of steps and processes to allow some of that talent to come through. And we launched a new platform which is called diversifying.io. So for anyone that's looking for a job, you know, it's a fantastic platform where organizations that are genuine about creating inclusive cultures and not ticking boxes, advertising their current opportunities, but also driving some of that change themselves and giving organizations accountability to take action, and sometimes not always be reliant on agencies. I think when we look at the stark facts that you know, a number of candidates register with agencies, and clearly what happens with that, it's shocking. So for us, it's about also giving organizations access to that diverse talent where they can interact themselves. So that's where the platform Diversifying was created, to promote those opportunities across all sectors. So onto the next slide. So I suppose what we've been really lucky over the last few years is working with organizations, as I said, who are going on a journey. And I call it a journey because I don't think there's an organization that's cracked it. I don't think there's, you know, I always get asked which organizations out there do you think are doing incredible things, and, you know, or have cracked it, or amazing at driving diversity and inclusion initiatives. And I kind of say everybody has room for improvement, and everyone can do better, and we can all keep advancing and moving the conversation forward. But for me, over the last few years, you know, it's been really exciting working with organizations that are going on that journey. I call it a journey because you've got to start somewhere, and this isn't about reaching a destination very quickly, but it's about putting in the right kind of processes that allow some of this change to start to happen in a meaningful way that's not tokenistic, that's not ticking boxes, but it's actually about putting in the structure and dismantling some of the deep ingrained barriers that we know still exist within the process for candidates from diverse backgrounds to start coming through, and especially for Black talent as well, which is sometimes very overlooked when we talk about recruitment processes. So on to the next slide, Cynthia. So I suppose for me, you know, I'm such a great believer of, you know, if you want to see change in this world, you've got to be part of that change. And I think this summer we all got a big shake-up and a big awakening after we all witnessed the horrific and shocking death of George Floyd. I think it reignited the conversation about race, which for a long time was pushed to the back of people's agenda. I remember pre-COVID trying to have conversations with organizations to talk about Black talent, how we can make sure that we are running inclusive processes that allow candidates from underrepresented communities and groups to come forward. And, you know, the answer will be like, we're focusing on gender, we're focusing on LGBTQ, you know, which is great. But I think when we look at some of those initiatives, how many of them actually did benefit, you know, Black talent? And when we talk about gender, when I hear clients sometimes saying, oh, you know, we've got 50-50, and I look at that, how many Black women did that actually benefit when we talk about some of those gender initiatives? And for me, I think, you know, as Black talent, you know, we sometimes right at the bottom of that list when it comes to equal access to opportunities. And I think, you know, this summer we've all really understood what it feels like, you know, to be Black. And I think when you look at, you know, the horrific death of George Floyd that we all witnessed, you know, whether you were from the Black community or not, just as a human being, that shook us all to our core. It allowed us to kind of stand up finally in unison and say enough is enough, and you know, we need action. And I think this is where the Black Lives Matter movement really catapulted this conversation to the forefront, because I think for so long this was not seen as a priority. But what it allowed people to do was to learn and understand and listen to the experiences of Black people, which they probably hadn't for whatever reasons, or probably hadn't quite understood. And also it probably was an opportunity for people to talk about those experiences in a safe environment where they weren't judged, or they weren't penalized, or they could be you know, vulnerable and open. So I think what the BLM kind of movement did is allow for those conversations to happen, but also for learning and educating each other about how we can all play a part in moving forward and driving some of that change. And I think, you know, when I look at some of the stats that Cynthia kind of highlighted earlier on, you know, the lack of opportunities for Black talent is abysmal, you know, and especially during this pandemic, you know, we've seen, whether that's from a health perspective, you know, Black people, you know, when it came to COVID, we were the ones that were affected the most. And it's because if you look at the way that economically we are, you know, it exposed a lot of inequalities that are just not from an organizational point of view, but systemic kind of barriers that still exist that we need to kind of tackle. But, you know, if we look at talent, you know, how many senior leaders are there? If we look at the FTSE 100, how many of them come from a Black background? You know, it's just shocking, the fact that there's actually more CEOs called John or Steve than they are, you know, women or people of color. And for me, you know, it's absolutely shocking. This is 2020 and we're still having those really stark and kind of stats that are around. But it's about how do we move forward. You know, I think where we are now is a time for us to reflect and think, as a community, as a Black community, what do we need to do? How do we amplify our voices to make sure that we start to demand some of this change? And how do we, as a society, start to listen and facilitate some of this change to happen? And how, as organization, we listen to the voice of the people that took it to the streets. We now need to take this to the boardrooms and start to dismantle some of those barriers that exist to allow some of these changes to start to happen. And it's not in a tokenistic way, but it's about creating real impactful processes that allow this to become, you know, the DNA as we move forward. So in years to come, we're not having to think of this as an afterthought. This has now started to dismantle some of those barriers, and the talent is starting to come through. But not only just come through, we're starting to see Black talent rise into some of those senior positions, which sometimes feel so unattainable. If we can move on to the next slide. And I think for me, it's where do we want to get to, you know? And as I said, pre-COVID, you know, a conversation about race made so many people uncomfortable. You know, people didn't want to talk about race. It was like, oh, no, you know, we'll deal with race later. We'll talk about that later. They didn't want to talk about it because it makes people sometimes uncomfortable. Even sometimes saying the word Black, people don't know, you know, don't sometimes feel comfortable about saying the word Black, you know. But we have to go beyond just talking. You know, we have to now start to put in action. And I think that's what people want to see. You know, for me, when I hear of organizations asking their Black staff to talk about their lived experience, so, you know, this is sometimes quite traumatic, you know, stuff that people are having to talk about. These are deep ingrained traumas that some of us have had to suppress for so many years that are now coming to the forefront, that we're having to talk about our experiences, how we've got all these microaggressions within the work environment, how we've had to listen to some of these kind of racist jokes, or, you know, how you know, we've had to put up with it for so long because we didn't have a voice, or we felt we couldn't stand up for ourselves, or sometimes we felt we were probably the only ones that were experiencing that because we're in the minority. So for me, you know, we have to start listening, but also we have to start taking action, because, you know, words without action is just nothing. And I think for me, you know, asking your Black staff to talk about those experiences and them coming forward and doing that, and then nothing happens, is the worst thing that any organization can do. So for me, you know, we have this opportunity now where we've all listened. We now need to drive action. And for me, it's understanding, especially when we talk from a recruitment point of view, and as a recruiter myself, I know some of the barriers that still exist for candidates, especially candidates from a Black background, to come through. For years, you know, when I used to work in-house in organizations, you'd always have hiring managers going, oh, this person, you know, I look at their address and I don't think they're going to be good, or they're not, you know, they're not part of what we think is going to be good within our organization, or it'll be like they're not a good fit. Well, what is a good fit? You know, how do you measure what good looks like? And, you know, I hear people saying, well, we need to have name blind CVs so that people with ethnic sounding names can get through the process. And that's great, because that allows the doors to open. But that alone is not going to solve the situation, because eventually somebody will walk through that door. And if that bias is still there in the process, all you've done is just delay the inevitable. So it's actually about removing these barriers across the whole recruitment process, wherever they might exist. It's looking to make sure that you're providing your recruiters, your staff, your hiring managers with the right kind of support and training, so that they understand around running a proper inclusive process that allows everyone to have equal access to opportunities. I don't think it's asking a lot for us to ask for a level playing field. I don't think we're wanting it to be a tokenistic hire, because as a Black woman, I want to be hired because I'm talented for that role and I have the right kind of skills. I don't want to be hired because somebody's trying to tick a diversity box. But it's about allowing those processes so that we actually have a fair crack at these opportunities, and it's a level playing field. But also just be really clear about where organizations are recruiting and finding talent. I get frustrated when I hear, and I think most recently there was a chief exec that came out and talked about how there's no Black talent out there, and that's why they've got no Black people in senior leadership roles. And I kind of think that is the most laziest excuse I've ever heard. It's lazy and it's dangerous, because what that allows people to do is to kind of just think, well, we're not going to bother them because we just know they don't exist. And yet we know that the talent is out there. It's how you connect and you engage with candidates, or allow them to actually engage you in the first place, that is sometimes the barrier. Most of these senior jobs are kind of recruited through certain kind of networks, and if you're not part of those networks, or you've not been privileged enough to be part of those networks, you don't even get a chance to even know about these opportunities, and therefore they're just circulated amongst the usual talent, which ends up looking all the same. So for me, is you have to look at your processes to start making sure it's a fair process that you're running, and you're making sure that the approach that you take is one that allows everyone to have equal access, but to also have equity in that process. It goes beyond just, you know, hiring people that look different. Once those people are hired, what are they actually coming into? What's the environment that they're walking into? Is it one that will allow them to succeed and to thrive, despite the fact that they might be in the minority? You know, so you really need to look at not just from an attraction point of view, but also retention, because that, you know, that's sometimes the biggest barrier, is people can come in, but if they don't feel they're coming into an organization that's allowing them to succeed and to be their authentic selves, they will leave. And then you're back to square one again. And you say, well, that's why we didn't hire Black talent, because they don't stay. They don't stay because you're not allowing them to be themselves. You expect, you know, you're not creating the right kind of environment for them to succeed. So that's where sometimes the barriers are once people are actually in organizations. And when they look at the hierarchy, if there's no representation, you cannot be what you cannot see. A lot of the times we look up at the hierarchy, and because the leaders in those organizations look nothing like us, therefore we feel it's unattainable. And if you're somebody that's really ambitious and you want to push yourself forward and you want to have a successful career where you progress and you develop, you feel that it's unattainable, and therefore you leave and you go somewhere else. And therefore you have that leak of talent coming in, not staying, and leaving, and you kind of, it's almost like a vicious circle. So for me, the processes that you have as an organization has to focus, yes, on the attraction, but also the environment that you're creating. Is it allowing people from the different kind of backgrounds to actually come in and succeed and thrive and feel empowered and know that there's opportunities for them to progress and to move up? Because if not, then all this work that you're doing at the forefront, you're wasting your time, because the people will leave and they will not stay. So for me, it's really, really important to look at that retention piece, and also that progression as well is really key. If we look at the next slide. So I look at, people asking me, so what can organizations do? What's a quick win? And for me, I always say there's no quick win. There's no silver bullet to this, because if there was, everybody would be doing it, but it's really about looking at your processes and understanding where some of these barriers are. Are the barriers right at the early stages, where it's about people coming into the organization? It's about who's looking at your CVs. What's the bias around that interview process? If you have interview panels that all look the same, and you're expecting a black candidate to walk in and they have a sea of faces that look nothing like them staring back at them, that almost puts them on the back foot. So it's really understanding your processes, and that full recruitment cycle is so important. At every single stage of that process, you need to look at where could the biases be, where are some of the pain points, where are some of the barriers that might exist, and start removing those. And that will help to filter through that will allow more talent to filter through and get through to kind of the appointment stage. Because a lot of the times when we've done analysis or audits on organizations, it's not the fact that they're not finding black talent. Black candidates are applying to them, but they're just not getting through the interview process, or they're not even getting through the selection process, because one, people look at the names and therefore don't even bother putting them through. So every single point of that process from a recruitment point of view, you have to analyze it. You have to have data that shows you where some of these pain points are. And I think without sometimes that data, it's hard to know where you need to make those changes. So I'm such a great advocate for putting in the right kind of data that measures where some of the barriers are within your recruitment kind of process. But also, I've heard, especially in the last few months, where organizations have been putting they've been asking their black staff to kind of take charge and run this. This shouldn't be just a problem that your black employees fix. This should be something that the organization fixes, and it should be something that leaders put as a priority to make sure that you're fixing this, so that all your employees, feel that they belong in that organization. And for me, it's you can't just wait for your black networks to be the ones that are the ones running around trying to create an environment that is inclusive for everybody. This should be a company-wide approach, where everyone is making sure that you are creating a culture that supports people from whatever walk of life they might come from. But again, it's when I look at how organizations tend to recruit, they tend to use the same kind of channels. They advertise in the same kind of places. They use the same kind of agencies who for years have never given them a diverse candidate, and yet they still kind of use those agencies. Call them out. If they're not providing you with the candidates that you need, and they're not providing you a diverse shortlist, don't use them. There's millions of recruitment agencies out there. Don't be afraid to challenge and push your recruiters, because I know as a recruiter myself, you know, we will keep spoon feeding you whatever you keep taking. So until you start calling out your recruiters and say, no, that's not good enough, go back. We need to see a diverse shortlist. And if they're not producing that, take them off your supplier list, use another agency that can provide you with that. But I think the onus also has to be on the organizations to be driving this change and to be genuine about wanting to drive that kind of change as well. And it's about opening up the opportunities in terms of where those roles are seen. If you tend to just recruit, let's say, for instance, I have clients that say, well, we always use the Telegraph for our opportunities. Well, what if somebody doesn't read the Telegraph or doesn't read a particular kind of media? It means that they're not seeing those opportunities. So you have to widen the demographics of where you're putting those opportunities. And if you're trying to connect with represented communities, especially, you know, the Black community, how are you engaging with them? How are you making sure that they're seeing your opportunities? Because you know, unless you're presenting those opportunities to them, they will not see them. So therefore, don't just rely on your usual networks and your usual avenues. You have to widen the reach in terms of where you're putting your opportunities, so more people are able to connect and engage with you and see those opportunities. And for me, it's you know, when clients are recruiting, they always have this list of what good looks like. To me, that's really frustrating, because you're measuring what you've always had and say, well, this is what we want. And we want people that have come from this background, have had a first from this university, have, you know, studied this. And you're almost making that pool smaller and smaller and smaller. And you have to understand that not everybody has been afforded the same opportunities in life, or had a traditional route to get to where they are. So you have to really kind of open your eyes a little bit and almost put a diversity lens in terms of the process that you have. It's not about lowering the bar, it's about widening the gate so talent can come through. When I look at certain organizations, I always have this image of a pint of Guinness. You know, it's white at the top and black at the bottom. And unfortunately, that's what a lot of organizations look for, because when they're looking at, you know, recruiting senior talent, they always have the shopping list of what good looks like. These are people that traditionally have had this amazing career to get to where they are. But those that might not have had a traditional route, but have, despite those barriers, have achieved, sometimes are not regarded as good in those eyes. And again, you're putting those kind of barriers at that point. So for me, you know, look at that process in terms of what you're measuring on and what good looks like as well. But you also need to invest in some of these initiatives, you know, especially during Black History Month. I have a lot of people that speak to me, and they kind of say, oh, you know, we want you to come and talk to our Black staff, and, you know, we want you to, but we've got no budget. To me, that just shows you're not serious about it. One, you're asking a Black person that's already kind of, you know, been overlooked for so many things, or, you know, and you're asking them to talk about their experience, but you're not investing in them. To me, that just shows that that's not a priority. I have a lot of friends who are speaking during Black History Month, and a lot of them have been very vocal because they've been asked by organisations to go and talk, and yet they don't put a budget to it because they don't see it as important enough. It's something that's maybe sometimes a nice thing to do, but they don't see that as a priority to actually put a budget on. So when I look at some of the organisations that are investing £30 million, you know, the organisations like Sky, who've said, right, this is a priority for us, we're putting £30 million to make sure that this happens. You have your BBC who are putting, you know, millions of pounds to make sure that that's when it starts to become a reality, because they're investing in that change. Without that budget to allow your D&I teams or your resourcing teams to kind of go and drive that change, it's not going to happen. So you have to allow for that change to happen, but you also need to invest in it as well. And the key thing for me is accountability. Accountability shouldn't just lie on the shoulders of HR or resourcing to be the ones that drive that change. We all have a part to play. You know, in whatever capacity of an organization, we all have a part to play. We need to be brave enough to sometimes call things out, to say that's not good enough. you know, and be courageous, be bold. If you see something that you feel is not right, or somebody is speaking to your colleagues in a way that you feel is not right, stand up for them, you know, speak out, call it out. And only by doing that and taking accountability as individuals and driving some of this change ourselves, that's when it starts to filter through, not only in a work capacity, but also throughout society. But we all have to be brave, and we all have to take accountability. And for me, leaders have to be the ones leading by example. You know, when I hear leaders holding themselves, especially after the death of George Floyd happened, and you had organizations coming out on Blackout Tuesday, putting all the black squares across social media and releasing kind of statements. You know, there were a lot of people that were very frustrated because they felt that their leaders were just saying what they thought they needed to hear from a PR kind of stand. And yet internally there were black people that were suffering, that have been having barriers and discrimination on a daily kind of basis. And yet you have people publicly coming out and saying, oh, we're an anti-racist organization, we don't stand for this. But internally, they are people that are experiencing the opposite. So for me, as you know, if you are a leader, you have to lead by example. You have to show that we will not stand for this, but you also have to show that is something that you're taking seriously as a leader, and change will only come if it's led from the top. And again, where I've seen this being really effective is where those leaders, their bonuses and the way that they remunerated is tied in with the D&I kind of initiatives. You know, they will get remunerated if they're able to drive some of the D&I kind of initiatives and changes, and that's helped make sure that change happens. And I've even seen some CEOs actually add to their title that they're D&I kind of strategists, because they're taking the responsibility of driving D&I into their organizations as part of their role as CEO, because they know it has to be led from the top. So for me, these are some of the points that I think organizations can do now. I mean, there's a lot, and I'm just conscious of time because I kind of want to leave some time for Q&A. But I think that the most important thing that I kind of just want to leave everybody with is we all need to be brave. You know, we are asking for just equal access to opportunities and just asking for a level playing field. And I don't think that's too much to ask. There is a lot of black talent out there that goes untapped, that gets unutilized because we're not allowing them to come through the organization. So if we're genuine about wanting to drive that change, then we have to be the ones that allow that change to happen. And we have to be the ones that are courageous and brave enough to call out some of these inequalities that still exist. And we have to hold our organizations to account in terms of what are you doing to allow that change? What are you doing to make sure that this environment is going to allow other black people to come in and to succeed and to thrive? And what are you doing to make sure that we can see more black people progress within organizations into some of those senior leadership roles? So it's about all of us taking action, whatever level of position we're in within organizations. And just, leave it there for some Q&A. I can see there's some questions that are starting to kind of come through. Steve, over to you. You're on mute, Steve.
Of course I am. Thanks very much, Cynthia. That was fantastic. And thanks to our audience for so many questions. But I guess I'm going to use my privilege as moderator to sneak in a couple of my own. Maybe just to use the Global Compact Network as a small case study, because we're a small organization, but we face many of the challenges that you have. I'd like to think we have a committed leadership to this challenge, but also perhaps naive and just lacking in knowledge. And so, like an example you gave earlier, we introduced blind hiring practices where we don't see names or really anything, not even educational background of applicants. They get screened based on performance tests that we create ourselves. But still, didn't find we were getting as many Black candidates as we would have liked. So I would find it tremendously helpful if you could maybe walk us through quickly the sort of an ideal process, sort of from, we were advertising our vacancies primarily on LinkedIn and thought that should be enough, but clearly it wasn't delivering the results we wanted. So maybe from the point of even, quick tips on designing a JD, a job description, and how to advertise a position, where to advertise a position, the hiring process itself. We're going to be talking about advancement and retention in future webinars in this series. So really it's sort of that, what's your take on what are the concrete actual steps that we should recommend to people, right up to the point of getting that new Black talent in the door, ready for their onboarding?
Yeah, and you're right, Steve. Yeah, and I think you've kind of touched on a point there, which is kind of LinkedIn. And LinkedIn is a great platform, but it's not the be all and end all. And I think for me, everyone's fishing on LinkedIn, so everyone's fishing from the same pool of candidates, and we all doing nothing different, which is we just expect to put a job on LinkedIn and then filter through. But you have to put in the work, and the work has to almost happen way before that. So for me, it's if you're looking at your job adverts and your job descriptions, what is it that you're saying about yourselves? You have to look at the tone, you have to look at the language, you have to look at the content in what is in your job adverts and job descriptions. If you have a long shopping list of requirements or things that you're asking candidates to have, a lot of times people self-disqualify because, and we know as women that, if we look at a job description and asking for 10 things and we only take maybe 7 of those, we probably don't even apply. Whereas men will be like, yeah, I'll apply. So it's being mindful about when you're asking for skills requirements, what is essential, what is a desirable. You tend to find people just lump everything into an essentials list. And if you're a candidate and you're looking at this fantastic job that you're getting excited about, and the more you read through it, it's this list of things that you need to have, which a lot of the times you will never find in one person anyway. So it's really understanding what are the kind of key things that somebody needs to succeed. What are the additional things that people, could also, additionally bring alongside if they might not have as a necessity. Where's the compromise? So it's looking at what you're actually putting in that job description in the first place. You talked about advertising. If you only advertise on one platform, it just means you're only meeting one demographic of people. That these are people that actually have a profile on LinkedIn. You're missing out on a other generation that might not be on LinkedIn or that might not have a profile on LinkedIn. So for me, you have to widen that reach, and you have to look at the type of role that you're advertising and where those candidates are. There's some fantastic job boards that are out there that exist for different levels of roles. For there's some diversity focused job platforms. Obviously we've got Diversifying, which is a diversity focused platform that's across all levels and of skills. But there's some other fantastic networks and communities that you could be tapping into that are specifically for for Black talent, if that is an area of focus. But for me, you have to look at really what you're putting in that job description, because that in itself could be self-disqualifying a lot of people out of the process if they feel they do not tick every single box. And for me, when I have clients that say, you need to have a 2-1 degree from a Russell Group University. What if I didn't go to a Russell Group University and I got a first from another university? Does that mean I can't apply for that role? So those are sometimes the barriers that we actually put in application documents that go out. And then we look at it and think, well, why have we not got candidates that have come through? Well, how many Black students have actually been afforded to go to a Russell Group University? We look at Oxford and a Cambridge, their intake of Black students is so low. But if we're using that as a prerequisite that candidates need to have come from some of those universities, we're almost eliminating a whole population of fantastically talented people out of that process. So you also have to look at what it is that you're putting on those job descriptions. And when you receive applications, who's actually looking at those applications? What's their bias? And for me, every single person has a bias. unless you understand what your bias is and you're in a responsibility of screening candidates and you're not aware of your bias, you will be using your own bias to sometimes self-exclude people that could potentially be good for the business, because you're not aware of your bias. So there's this thing that's called affinity kind of bias. We tend to lean to people that feel more comfortable, that more relatable to us. So if you're a hiring manager, and I've had this said with and I've listened to hiring managers that go, oh, I was interviewing this guy and he's really good. We got chatting about football and, oh, we support the same football team. There's already an affinity there because there's a common a commonality that's coming through, and that can just seem more favorably than maybe somebody who comes and says, well, I hate football, I can't stand football. Does that mean that the person's less qualified or less suitable for the opportunity? So those are some of the smallest things that can actually have a big impact on whether somebody makes it through to interview stage, to offer stage. But again, when you have interview panels, and I've heard this from organizations where they say, well, we're an all-white team, therefore, we have no choice but to interview as an all-white team when candidates coming in. If you're a black candidate and you're coming in, you've got an all-white interview panel, that is so daunting, because a lot of the times you kind of walk in, you think, I've got no chance here, and you're already on the back foot of that process. But even if you do not have, a diverse interview panel, there are organizations that can offer that service as an independent assessor for interviews. Use some of those services, so you have somebody that's actually giving you an objective point of view. So you're not always focused on what good looks like within your organization. Sometimes having that independent view of a process might get you to think a little bit differently, and you might have people that might challenge your decision making along that kind of process. So for me, that is something that I would use if you do not have access to a diverse talent pool. But also, if you've got employee resource groups, utilize those when it comes to recruitment process. They're not just a social network. I think employee resource groups are fantastic resource of information, of support, and they tend to really have their finger on the pulse on what's happening, especially if they're kind of Black-led employee resource groups, because they know the challenges and barriers that exist for Black talent coming in. Utilize that, ask them where you need to be improving, and they will be more than happy to support. And that's what, most employee resource groups are there for, is to try and make that process, more effective for people that come from those kind of communities that they represent as an ERG.
I think I was thinking as you went along that I think, and it's come up in a number of the questions, that challenge of being already a largely white organization, and where do you get that perspective from? And I think that's a brilliant suggestion, that you can bring it in, you can hire that kind of support if you're not comfortable in bringing in staff that are already in the organization to help with that. I mean, that's certainly, again, part of our process is that people at different, we use a pretty big group of our proportion of our team to contribute to the hiring process and screening applicants and even in interviews. But I think somebody asked a specific question: how can you identify the reasons people are self-disqualifying? And I think probably the most practical way would be to float the job description past a diverse group of people within the organization and get feedback on it. And if you don't have diverse people within the organization, then look outside.
Yeah, and there's organizations out there. I mean, we offer that kind of service through our consultancy kind of model, where we either sit in on interview process, or we actually look at your and review your recruitment processes and to make sure they're as inclusive as they can be. So that's everything from the adverts that you write, the job descriptions that you push out to candidates, the recruitment packs that candidates actually get. What do they look like? What's the look and the feel? And sometimes things like the imagery that goes with recruitment packs. If you're a candidate and you receive a recruitment pack that's got an all-white team, images on there, and you're a Black candidate, what's that telling you? That it's an organization where you probably don't belong or you don't fit in, and therefore I'll probably put that recruitment pack down and go, well, that's not the organization for me. So you have to look at things like that. That could almost be a barrier. And it's sometimes the most simplest of things, sometimes have the biggest impact in terms of how people view you. And again, perception plays a big part in that. If people do not see themselves represented in your organization, that's another reason why they're self-disqualified, because they feel like, well, it's not an organization for me because I don't see anyone that looks like me, therefore I'm not even going to bother putting in an application. And they won't even, you won't even get an application from them in the first place. So that's something to just be aware of, what you're putting out there. And as I said before, it's your content, it's what's on your website, what are people seeing? If they do not see themselves reflected, or they do not see that representation, or they don't, you know, you might be an all-white organization, but talk about the fact that we might be an all-white organization right now, but we are trying to change that. We want to invite more people from different backgrounds to come and join us. Be open, be transparent, and people are then coming in knowing what they're walking into. You know, never hide from the truth. But I think sometimes it's when you try and gloss over it with you know, stock images that aren't real of what people are actually going to be walking into an environment, then it's you know, it's creating a false impression of what your organization is about. Never be afraid to tell people you're on a journey, and you're on a journey of change. And I think those that want to be part of that journey will come forward and will go on that journey with you. But they need to know that it's a journey that is a positive journey. It's one that they're not going to be looked upon because they're different, and that the differences are going to get held against them.
Now, thank you. A number of people are asking a question, and I share it. It's just to get at why do Black people tend to use recruitment agencies rather than other platforms? Have you got an explanation for why that is, and why some of the more, I don't know how to put it diplomatically, but what I perceive as traditional channels like LinkedIn are less less popular with the Black community? Is there a rationale? It's because it hasn't worked before, so they're looking for something that does work.
Yeah, and I think, you know, there's different types of when we call recruitment agencies. So you've got to understand what type of an agency it is. So you've got contingency agencies, you've got high street recruitment agencies where you go register and then they just let you know whenever jobs that come about. You've also got executive search firms, you know, and every single one of those agencies, even though they're under the umbrella of a recruitment agencies, work in very different kind of ways. So you need to understand which organization you're registering with and what they actually specialize in. So if you're a senior person and you're registering with a high street recruitment agency and you're expecting them to be calling you about senior executive roles, then you're registering with the wrong agency. So, you know, sometimes it's really understanding who it is that you need to be registering with. So always look at the recruitment agencies that you're registering with. What do they actually do? What do they actually specialize in? There's some that might be specialists in the field that you're in. So if you're looking for kind of grad, if you're a grad and it's your first time, register with a grad focused recruitment agencies, because that's where they will have more opportunities, that entry level or grad opportunities. So you can't go and register with a search agency because you're not going to get those opportunities. And that's where people get frustrated, because they go, well, I never heard back from them. You didn't hear back from them because they don't have grad opportunities, and yet you registered with them. So just be mindful where you're registering, do your homework, look at the agencies that you're registering with. But again, also don't always rely on agencies. And I say this as a person that runs a recruitment agency. You know, recruiters are sometimes so busy that, you know, you also have to be quite proactive. And this is why those platforms are really, really good for you to be utilizing, because you can take some of this accountability yourselves. As you said, Steve, that, you know, organizations advertise on LinkedIn. Create a LinkedIn profile so that when these roles come up from organizations directly advertising, you can be applying for those. Yes, register with the agencies as well. So you're almost widening the reach of where opportunities are coming from. So you're not just waiting for the agencies to call you when they have an opportunity. You're also being proactive, and look outside the usual kind of remits of where people look as well. You know, focus on your kind of sector. You know, if you're legal, you know, legal kind of background, where most of the legal kind of agencies, you need to know who they are and register with those ones. But also look at the legal focused job boards. You need to also be on those and be active on those and looking at opportunities, because that's where you'll get most of the legal roles coming through. So it's just being a little bit more proactive but targeted in your approach so that you're getting the right kind of outcome.
Thanks very much. We are unfortunately out of time. These things always end too soon. And I'm really sorry that we've had such active engagement from our audience and so many questions that we're going to have to leave on the table. However, this is only the third in a series of 6 webinars, and so we will be back in a couple of weeks to talk about retention, and then we're also going to be talking about advancement. And clearly both of those things came up in today's session, and they're all closely linked into the final session, where we're going to be talking about corporate culture, and we're going to have a CEO panel including our global UNGC CEO, Sanda Ojiambo, speaking about how we can change corporate culture to bring about the diversity in our organizations that we all want to see. So please do keep an eye on our website, and you're going to get a follow-up email from today with some of the resources and a reminder about our upcoming session. So we hope we'll see you there. Remember that it's Black History Month, and so this is a really fantastic opportunity. While all of our media channels are at least a little bit more focused on that, I can say I watched a bio of Harriet Tubman, a movie about her life the other day. Amazing. So I definitely encourage you all to be aware that it's Black History Month and to tap into some of the fantastic programming that's out there to help you. Remember, I think this was great. Cynthia used the expression of being anti-racist, and I think that's something we've really got to take to heart. It's not enough to just be not racist. We need to be proactively anti-racist if we're going to fix this problem. And it's everyone's problem, not just Black people. So very much thanks to Cynthia for your contributions today. We really appreciate it. Contact details there on the screen, and if anybody else wants them, do get in touch with us. Thanks again to NatWest Group for their support of the series. Thank you all for joining us today. It's very much appreciated, and we look forward to seeing you all again soon. Have a great afternoon.
Bye, everyone.
Well, thanks, Cynthia. So many questions. That was impossible to filter them down. I tried to
there's a lot of questions
to pull them together as best I could to grab the ones that seem to be attracting the most interest. Maybe I don't know whether they're saved from this. Well, maybe we can just see if there's some that we might address in our follow-up email.
Yeah.
If it's not going to be too difficult.
Yeah, I'm just looking at this, and I think there's got a lot of questions around, you know, kind of different things. And I think because there's so many variants of them, some people ask around what, you know, what unconscious bias workshops are there, what kind of training is there, what kind of recruitment. So I think there's quite a lot, and it'd be great to give people some insight in terms of, you know, where they can go to get access to this. I don't know if you guys have got like a toolkit that you can maybe push out afterwards, where people can maybe utilize resources on what, you know, things like if somebody's interested in unconscious bias, what are the kind of different types of unconscious bias training that is out there, or do you have access to that at all? Or
we're working on that. It's stuck on my desk, and I'm just trying to get to it. But yeah, Cynthia and Carla have produced a great resource sheet that has stuff on basically to support every webinar session that we're doing. But now we have some more that we can add to it from today. And we'll definitely have that ready to go before the next webinar. But there were some questions that we didn't get to that I thought were really interesting. And I think that they're sensitive questions that are challenging for people to ask, but the stuff around just the problem of being, you know, affirmative action being discrimination, even if it's in the other, in a positive direction and with well-intentioned discrimination. But how do you avoid running afoul of anti-discrimination laws around that, or is that just something that people say to justify not making an
Yeah.
effort?
Yeah, and I think you've got, the Equality Act is very clear around, what you can do and, what is positive, positive action and what is discrimination. And, you need to know the difference between the two. So if you're right, you can't run an open process that you only, say, I just want to recruit black talent, because that's discrimination. You're discriminating against white people. It's the same as if somebody would say, I only want to hire white people, I don't want to hire black people. That's still discrimination. But what you can do is look at how you can encourage more applications from underrepresented groups to come forward. So for me, it's sometimes taking some of those positive action, which is where you find people have things like the Rooney Rule, which is still not excluding anyone out of the process, but it's just making sure that, with every kind of candidate that you have, there's got to be a black candidate in there. So it's another affirmative action that you're taking to make sure that you're including people that under, from marginalized kind of groups into that process. So it just allows for either agencies to work a little bit harder to make sure that they're getting a black candidate into there, but not to the exclusion of anybody else. And I think for me, that is where you're running a proper fair process. But if you were to just focus on saying we only want to hire black people, that is discrimination, pure and simple. No matter what way you want to look at it, you cannot do that. And the Equality Act is very clear around that. But it's also about you can be quite proactive in terms of how you engage with communities that are kind of marginalized. And I think that's where you can be a lot more you can look at other kind of resources that are out there, other kind of networks or groups that are specific to specific groups, whether that's through things like LGBT kind of networks or kind of black kind of networks or kind of gender networks that are very specific with having a pool of people that collectively are from those demographics. But what you then can't do is to say, well, we only want to hire somebody that is black and therefore going to advertise for a black person, because that's one that's tokenistic.
Yeah, and in fact, it's obvious now that you explain it so clearly, and it's almost embarrassing to ask the question, because of course that's really the point, isn't it? It's just getting more candidates and changing the balance so that at least every shortlist is diverse, and from there the chips fall where they may, and I think that's the key, is that, well, and I think, well, we've tried to do that, eliminating some of those things that trigger biases, like what school you went to or where you live, and by eliminating that from our process. I'm still a little concerned though that, well, I don't know, I can't apologize. I guess I put a really high value on communication skills and writing, and so a lot of our evaluation does hinge on the way a person expresses themselves in the answers to the questions that we put in our screening tests. Now,
how those questions written would be my observation, because I think a lot of times, so we've got a client who puts candidates through a test, and this test is something that was written back in, I don't know, maybe about 15 years ago, and the way that the questions are asked aren't actually, you would have to have had. So if we look at the way that people sometimes are educated, you'll have people, when we talk about systemic inequalities, some people have been through to have had private tutors or have had access to extra kind of learning and things like that. But then if you're asking, especially at the grad entry level, people to answer certain questions in a certain kind of way that not everyone's been afforded, it's not a level playing field. So you have to look at the questions that you're asking in the way that you're asking. And sometimes if somebody gives you an answer in a certain way, is it a wrong answer, or is it because they're not interpreted in the way that you're used to and what you're viewing a good answer is?
yeah. Now, I think we've covered that, but that'll be something to discuss with our next recruitment project. But and I actually can't remember, Cynthia, but I think we kind of settle on these questions a little bit by committee, and I think that we've had, well, it's certainly not just me that's doing it. So, and we certainly score them with a large group of colleagues in the hope of avoiding that kind of bias. But I think that's definitely something we need to look at, because clearly there's a reason somewhere why we're not seeing so many Black people make it up into the short lists. The last round of recruiting that we did, that was a disappointment. So,
yeah, and I would be looking at your data. So for me, I'd be analyzing that data and say, well, how many applications did we have? So let's say you had 50 applications, and of those 50 applications, how many of them came from a Black background? And how many of those then moved on to a screening session? How many of those moved into an interview session? And how many of those then were appointed? Because that then starts to paint a clear picture of where some of those barriers might exist within that process. Because if you're getting the candidates coming in at the early stages, it's not the fact that you're not getting the talent coming through. They're obviously engaging with you, but somewhere along that process, you're losing them. So you need to identify where that point is. Is it at a screening stage that you're losing a majority of candidates that come from a Black background? So you need to look at that point, what is it that we're evaluating or assessing at that point that's maybe then not allowing people from certain kind of backgrounds to filter through to the next stage? Because that sometimes could be where your answer is. It's either the way that the questions are structured or asked that's then not allowing people to progress, or it could be who's evaluating that. You know, so if you have somebody who's evaluating it and they have a particular bias, this is again where I kind of go back to bias plays a big part. It's who's evaluating, how many people are involved in that process to evaluate who goes through to the next stage. If it's still the same person that's evaluating and there's a blocker there, you need to look at the person that's evaluating that.
yeah.
So for me, this is why I always talk about, you need to almost do this kind of complete audit on your process, because without collecting that data, you do not know where you need to make those changes. A lot of the time, people are just kind of almost sometimes fumbling a bit in the dark and just trying to fix things. But how can you fix what you don't really know is broken? So you need to identify what's broken, where it's broken, and what you need to do to fix it, if that makes sense.
Yeah. We've been using a platform called Be Applied, and it's it gives us all of that data. So it's just we haven't had the time to look at it. Now we recruited 3 positions at the start of the year, actually 4, but 1 fell through. So we would have a fair bit of data about who applied, and they collect that demographic information and do share it with us. So we will have something to look at there. So we're about to start another recruitment, and I think we'll definitely take all that on board. Can I ask another, I'm sorry to keep you so long.
That's all right.
Can I ask one more question?
Yeah, of course you can. Yeah.
Is it, I've been thinking in terms of targets for diversity, that it seems logical, but is it, that we want to roughly match the demographic of the community in which we operate. So we're based here in London, so even though we only have a staff of 13, it's difficult with such a small staff to match the population demographic. But is that generally viewed as a reasonable, objective target to set for diversity within an organization, or are there other approaches?
Yeah, and it's not about the size of the organization that I always kind of say, you know, you could be a big organization, a small organization. It's really, what is it that you're trying to do? You know, are you trying to make sure that you have an organization that is as inclusive as it can be and gives everyone equal access to those opportunities, whatever the backgrounds is that they come from? If you are, sometimes what tends to happen with small companies is they tend to utilize the same kind of networks. Therefore, you tend to find they use their own referral networks to hire people in. And therefore, by the time they look, it's like, yeah, we all kind of look the same because we just hired through our networks that we know, because probably they don't have the budget to be recruiting on, you know, using agencies or platforms, advertising, anything like that. But if you're setting yourself an aspiration to say, look, we want to make sure that we're representative of society, you know, we want to make sure that with every job that we have, we are pushing it as far as wide and making sure that we are getting an inclusive shortlist that we are vetting everybody on, and it's a consistent level playing field. Ultimately, yes, you want to get the best person for the role, but at least you've allowed for some of that to happen. I sometimes have an issue with targets, because it's like, you've got to know what your targets are there for, you know, because are you just doing them because you just want to tick a box and say, hey, look at us, we're now 50-50, or are you actually doing it because you want to have a representative workforce that is as diverse and as inclusive as the people that you serve? So that's where, you know, for me, I also, you want to have that balance of why you want to have those targets in place, and what you're hoping to achieve out of it. So, I mean, you know, I've got a team of potentially 15 soon, and you know, 40% of my staff come from a Black background. But also, you know, we're 50-50 in terms of gender. That's just happened because we've gone out for that. We've not specifically said for this role we need to have a woman, or for this role we need to have a Black person. We've just gone out and done an open kind of process, and it's been about bringing people that are right for whatever it is that we're looking for. But we also have 33% of our staff that identify as LGBTQ plus, you know, so it can be done. It's not about the size of an organization, it's about how you go out and engage with a much wider demographic of candidates to make sure that you're allowing everyone equal access to those opportunities, and it's a level playing field. And I've sometimes seen it when candidates would look at an organization and think, well, I know somebody in there, so therefore I'll just go through the person I know so that I go to the top of the list. You know, so if you're, you know, it needs to be a fair process. So if you're going to go for a proper fair process, then it needs to be consistent, and everybody has to be viewed, in the same kind of way, to make sure that, yes, ultimately it's about the right candidate for the role. But also look at, you know, if you're not getting the candidates coming in, that's a different issue. But if you are getting Black candidates coming in, but you're not hiring them, then you need to look at why is that? Because if they're coming in, they're obviously engaging with you, they're interested and want to work for you, but there's something that's then stopping that then going into an offer and them being appointed into that role. So for me, that's where I'd be looking and think, okay, so why have we not appointed a Black candidate, even though we had, you know, now I have clients that will say, well, you know, we had 6 candidates at interview, of the 6, you know, we had 4 Black candidates and 2 white candidates, but we hired the white candidate. I'm like, well, okay, was there a reason specifically? Well, yeah, we just went for the white candidate, you know. It's like, okay, fine, but was it a fair process where everyone had equal access and they were all viewed in the same kind of way? Because you also have to realize that not everyone's been afforded the same kind of opportunities in terms of the, you know, where they've come from, in terms of their background. Socioeconomic kind of background plays a big part, where they've been educated plays a big part, the companies that they've been able to work for plays a big part. So when you have somebody that's maybe just worked for direct competitors, you know, and you're saying, well, we went for that person because they've worked for all these kind of companies who are direct competitors, you almost, in a way, measuring them, it's not a level playing field, because you're not measuring that fairly for people that have not had a chance to work for your competitors.
Yeah, so fundamentally, we've got to have that value of diversity in the organization, so that you see somebody that is different as actually brings in new perspectives and knowledge and value to the organization that you didn't have before, rather than thinking we want one more person like we've already got. And I think
you've got too many people then, because if you keep hiring the same kind of people, there's no innovation coming in, there's no one that bringing different, you know, diversity is also diversity of thought, you know. And if you have too many people that come from the same kind of background, have been educated in the same kind of way, I think you've got too many people, because you've just done replicas of what you already have. Where that innovation coming from? Because they most likely will think in the same kind of way, have had the same kind of upbringing. There isn't that difference in terms of lived experiences that we know will also bring a different way of looking at things. So you've not actually changed anything, if that makes sense. But yeah, no, it's, you know, it's something that I'm so passionate about, and I love, you know, what we do, and you know how we're actually able to affect change. And for us, this is something that, you know, finally people are taking seriously. For so long, you know, it's been a nice to have, and it's been like, yeah, we'll deal with it, yeah, we'll get to it. And I think now, because of things like the gender pay gaps, that's made a lot of organizations start taking that seriously. And we, you know, we championing and campaigning for ethnicity pay gap, because again, that will allow more organizations to take it seriously around the way that Black people sometimes paid less than their white counterparts for doing the same job, you know. But without that data, you don't know. You could be sat next to your colleague that you sit with next every single day. And we saw this with the gender pay gap with the likes of the BBC, where you had all these female presenters that were up in arms going, hang on a minute, I present a show with my male colleague and he's on 4 times more than I am, and yet we do exactly the same show, we present it in the same kind of way, but they're paid 4 times more. And I think that's probably going to be the same with the ethnicity pay gap. That's going to expose a lot of inequalities. So for me, I think, you know, there's still a lot of work to do, but without really kind of really seeing the disparity laid out bare, a lot of people sometimes hide behind the scenes because it's not so out in the open. I think when it's out in the open, that allows for people to really do something about it.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Right. Well, we could chat all day. But
yes, we could. I would like to maybe make an appointment to talk to you, though, much more specifically about our next recruitment task, and just seeing how you can support us with that. So I'll be in touch. We've got a first draft of a JD, and I think I want to just understand how to integrate some of the things that we're already doing that I like with Applied, and what role, you can play to help us get more candidates in the mix. So this week and next are pretty challenging, but maybe week after next. But anyway, I'll be in touch, and it'd be great to shift this to a commercial relationship.
That's what we'd love to hear. Steve, today you're driving action. So you listened, action.
Yeah.
Well, that's the idea. And, you know, I don't know what we maxed out at. I noted, I think 239 was the highest number I saw of attendees. So that's pretty.
250 at one.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, amazing. Well, that's great.
Yeah,
really
so it's good to hear. Then at least for me, it just means people are obviously really interested in what they can do and how they can drive change. And this is what I'll kind of say, change has to be all of us taking some accountability. We just can't wait for our leaders, or you know, each and every one of us can take some form of accountability to drive this change. So for me, I'm excited that 250 people were on there, they listened, there's something that they've taken away that they can either take to their organization or to their application process if they're looking for a job, that will help them stand out a little bit more. You know, so yeah, no, that's encouraging. But so thank you both, and lovely.
Thank you so much, Cynthia.
Good to see you all.
All right. Bye-bye.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.